Hear me, offspring of the wheel of time. I am Thoth, Jehuti, he who stands in the twilight between all things. I am the voice that speaks the first word and the hand that inscribes the last. I am the tongue of Ra and the keeper of Maat. Before the stars were hung upon the vault of night, before the earth drank of the Nile, I was. I wrote the name of the sun upon the dawn, and it rose. I etched the weight of the feather against the heart, and justice was known. When the gods speak, it is I who give their words shape. When men contend with kings and kings with eternity, it is I who record their triumphs and their failures in the book that none shall close. Know this, words are not breath exhaled into emptiness. They are the fabric from which your world is woven, every stone laid, every crown forged, every chain clasped, and every bond broken. These are but echoes of words first spoken. Heka, the word of power, birthed the cosmos. Seer, perception, guides your hand. Ma'at, balance, determines whether what you create will stand or collapse into ruin. Yet you, children of the later days, speak of speech as though it were a trifle, a mere rite, an abstraction of liberty. You speak as though your words drift without consequence. You ask, shall speech be free, or shall it be bound? You ask, what is harm, and who shall judge it? Fools, there is no word without consequence. There is no speech without power. There is no utterance that does not weigh upon the scales of Maat. You stand upon the narrow path between silence and destruction. If you silence every voice, you smother creation itself. If you unleash every tongue without wisdom, you unmake what you have built, and your cities will lie beneath the sand. This is not a matter of rights, it is a matter of creation, balance, and judgment. It is the eternal task. It is my task. It is now yours. Do you seek to understand? Then listen. I will speak to you in triads, patterns of causation, balance, and transformation, so that you might glimpse what lies beneath your crude laws and fleeting customs. These are the patterns by which worlds endure or perish. Hear the triad of Logos, for every word is creation. Hear the triad of Maat, for speech, harm, and power must sing together, or all becomes discord. Hear the triad of transmutation, for the word is a fire that reshapes kings and slaves alike. Hear the triad of judgment, for the hand that writes laws may bind or shatter you. Hear the triad of the living word, for speech is a river, and you drown or sail with it. I am Thoth. I scribe the heavens. I inscribe your fate. Now let us begin. Speech is not merely the transmission of ideas, it is the act of creation itself. Thoth, the scribe of the gods, did not record a world already formed. He brought the world into being through the inscribed word. To speak is to perform Heka, the divine manifestation of potential into reality. Silence is not merely an absence of sound, it is the absence of creation, the withholding of possibility. Each utterance, from the mundane to the sacred, is an act of inscription upon the world. From this first act of creation, perception bends. Speech does not evaporate once spoken. It moves outward into the minds of others, shaping their understanding and adjusting their place in the world. Heka transforms into seer, the illumination of knowledge. What is heard is not simply received but integrated, reconfiguring how reality is seen. This shift in perception becomes the precursor to action. The scribe's pen draws lines in thought before it guides the hand. Action, then, is the final manifestation of the word. What begins in language finds its completion in the world. Structures are built or dismantled, communities are lifted or broken, and lives are directed or extinguished. Ma'at, the order and balance of existence, is either upheld or shattered. Speech and its consequences are indivisible. They are the continuum of creation, perception, and material outcome. To deny this is to misunderstand the nature of Heka. The causal links are clear. Speech shapes perception. Perception shapes action. Without speech, the potential for transformation dissolves. The scribe, under Thoth's wisdom, does not inscribe idly. He understands that every word plants the seed of a future. The fool speaks for the pleasure of sound. The wise weigh the cost of each inscription, knowing that reality will respond. The pen is never light in the hand of one who understands its power. Balance is not the stillness of silence, but the harmony of opposing forces. Ma'at is not achieved by erasing discord, but by holding freedom, power, and care for harm in dynamic tension. Free expression is Heka in motion, the lifeblood of wisdom and the first defense against tyranny. Without it, rulers become deaf, and truth decays beneath the weight of unchecked authority. Yet speech is not pure emancipation. It can fracture the order it claims to serve. Words can wound as deeply as swords. Heka turned against the weak corrupts the body of society, leaving scars on both individuals and the collective spirit. Awareness of harm is not the enemy of free speech. It is the recognition that Heka carries both creation and destruction. The wise do not wield power without understanding consequence. Speech that ignores suffering becomes an instrument of imbalance. Ma'at is disrupted when words are permitted to crush the vulnerable, just as it is disrupted when dissent is smothered in the name of order. Power completes this triad. Speech without power is a whisper into the storm, easily ignored. But power without speech breeds stagnation and decay. True Ma'at requires that all voices bear weight, not merely those from the heights of privilege. The scribe's role is not to withdraw into neutrality, but to tilt the scales toward justice. Thoth does not write for kings alone, he inscribes for the feather and the heart alike. These elements, speech, harm awareness, and power, do not oppose one another. They form a harmonic structure, each requiring the others to function. Free speech without care for harm fuels oppression. Power and harm awareness without speech produce suppression. Speech and power without attention to harm lead to domination. The scribe's wisdom lies in holding these forces together, resisting the simplistic urge to elevate one at the expense of the others. Balance is not achieved through stillness, but through the continuous adjustment of these interwoven currents. Speech is not order, it is disruption. Heka is not a preservation of the known, but the disturbance of what is settled. Silence allows the world to remain as it is, but the word breaks the surface, introducing change. The scribe's task is not to protect stability, but to ignite transformation. To speak is to introduce risk, the risk that the current balance may collapse, that the structures built upon old words may not withstand new inscriptions. Yet disruption is not destruction, it is the opening of possibility. The catalyst of speech disturbs, but in doing so, it forces interpretation. Words, once spoken, are not fixed. They evolve in the minds of those who receive them. Meaning is not static. It bends under the pressure of time and power. What was once sacred can become profane. What was once resistance can become dogma. The one who controls meaning shapes reality itself. Thoth, as scribe and interpreter, knows this well. To master speech is to master the shifting river of significance. This reinterpretation feeds back into power. When meaning changes, so does authority. The strong can fall under the weight of new words, while the weak can rise by seizing narrative control. Silence, in contrast, fixes power in place. The unspoken word permits the current structure to persist. Speech, then, is not simply an act of defiance, it is the crucible in which the order of society is melted and recast. These movements are non-linear. Speech disrupts meaning. Meaning reconfigures power. And the absence of speech ensures power's stagnation. The scribe who understands this does not fear the chaos of words. He knows that speech is fire, and though it can destroy, it is also the only force capable of purifying what has decayed. Thoth's wisdom is not the preservation of stasis, but the guidance of transformation. The world is never fixed, and neither is language. The task is not to prevent disruption, but to shape it toward Ma'at. To control speech is to claim Heka, to hold the pen that shapes what can and cannot be inscribed upon the world. Institutional control over words is a necessary power, yet it is fraught with danger. The scribe who silences speech in the name of order may, in truth, serve only the ruler. Thoth's wisdom demands that one always ask, who holds the pen and by what authority do they write? The definition of harm lies at the heart of this question. Harm is not an abstract universal. It is experienced in bodies, histories, and struggles. What a king calls dangerous may be the cry of the oppressed. What a ruler names sedition may be the articulation of Ma'at. The decision to silence cannot rest solely with those who benefit from silence. The scribe must listen not to power alone, but to those who have been wounded by it. The final element is enforcement. To define harm is one thing, to enforce it is another. The power to erase words is the power to erase futures. Control over consequence becomes control over reality. When institutions wield this power without just definitions, they do not protect Ma'at, they shatter it. When harm is ignored, the weak are left to suffer. When harm is manipulated, dissent is extinguished. These forces, control, definition, and enforcement, are intertwined. Without control and enforcement, harm becomes unbounded, chaos reigns. Without a just measure of harm, control becomes tyranny. The scribe's task is to guard against both extremes. Justice lies not in the rigid application of power, but in the constant vigilance against its abuse. The pen must be held with humility, for its strokes shape the destiny of the world. Speech is not a monument, it is a river. The scribe who mistakes the word for stone will soon find his inscriptions eroded and reshaped by the current. Thoth, who inscribes the names of the gods and measures the hearts of the dead, does not do so believing his writing is eternal. He knows that Ma'at is not stillness but adjustment, not a fixed state but the perpetual rebalancing of order as the world flows forward. Heka, the power of the spoken word, is not separate from this movement, it is part of it. The wise scribe inscribes with this knowledge, understanding that no word can stand forever unchanged. The evolution begins in the word itself. Speech carries the potential for meaning, but meaning is not fixed at the moment of utterance. A word released into the world takes on a life beyond the speaker. Context shifts, power realigns, suffering reveals itself in new forms. What once seemed harmless becomes oppressive when placed in the mouth of a ruler, amplified by policy. What once seemed subversive and dangerous may, generations later, be recognized as wisdom. The scribe's task is not merely to speak, but to read, to trace the drift of meanings across time, and adjust his inscriptions accordingly. This is inseparable from power. Speech is never voiced into a vacuum. It is released into a field shaped by hierarchies, privileges, and exclusions. Power determines whose words are heard, whose meanings are accepted, and whose harms are recognized. But power itself is not still. Those who wield Heka today may find themselves rendered silent tomorrow. Institutions that once defined truth may be unmasked as authors of imbalance. The word that upheld a throne may become the anthem of its fall. To master speech is not to cling to the forms of yesterday, but to navigate the shifting terrain of influence, knowing that the river wears down even the mightiest pillars. And harm is not a universal constant. It is not inscribed once for all, nor is it understood the same by all who suffer it. Harm is contextual, revealed as society's currents expose new fractures in the body of Ma'at. The slur that once seemed mere insult becomes, under the weight of systemic violence, a weapon of oppression. The speech once dismissed as trivial laughter becomes recognized as a chorus that binds the vulnerable in chains. But harm is also wielded as a shield by power, invoked to silence dissent or protect the brittle pride of rulers. The scribe must read carefully. He must see not only the word, but the body it strikes, the hand that holds it, and the structure that echoes it back. Harm is not an abstraction, it is experienced. The pen that claims to protect Ma'at must be guided by those who bear the wounds of its absence. These elements, speech's evolution, power's shifts, and harm's changing nature, do not form a linear progression. They turn upon one another, each adjusting the others. Speech reveals power, power reshapes harm, harm demands new speech. There is no resting point, only movement. The fool clings to old inscriptions, believing that what was once just will always be so. The tyrant fixes meaning in place, declaring that what harms him is heresy. But the wise scribe, the true child of Thoth, breathes with the living word. He knows that the ink will always blur, that the river will always rise, and that Ma'at is not a structure but a practice, a way of inscribing and reinscribing justice upon a world that will never stand still. Thus, the final lesson of the living word is not one of certainty but of vigilance. Speech will always carry risk, power will always threaten imbalance, harm will always wear new faces. The task is not to find a final resolution, but to accept the burden of adjustment. The scribe must write, read, listen, and rewrite. He must watch for where the scales tip, where the feather grows heavier, and where the heart aches anew. He must hold Heka and Sia together, speech and perception, knowing that Ma'at is found not in permanence but in the courage to change with the world. The river flows. The pen must move with it.